Now, Japan's economy is the world's third biggest, but its glory days are well behind it and have been for more than 2 decades. So how to pump it back up? Prime Minister Shinzo Abe is to inject $265 billion into the economy in what is a massive stimulus package. But will it work? In a moment, we'll be speaking to an expert in Japan. But first, Azhar Sukri looks at Japan's rise and fall.
Japan was once a byword for innovation. From the rubble of World War II, it began automating the way things are made, producing cars that started every single time and electronic gadgets that revolutionized the way people entertained themselves.
Datsuns are sold all over the world.
Back in the 1980s, the big worry for the West was whether Japan would eclipse the mighty US. But all was not well. The rapid growth had led to overinflated property prices. In the late 1980s, the bubble burst and took Japan's economy down with it. Share prices peaked in 1989 and have never recovered from the crash that followed. It exposed some underlying weaknesses in the way Japanese companies work. The corporations that led Japan's growth in the post-war years were driven by a rigid hierarchy that failed to adapt to a rapidly changing world. Through the 1980s and 90s, American companies became more efficient and embraced new technologies more readily than their Japanese competitors did. Meanwhile, China liberated its economy, allowing it to churn out huge volumes of the same kind of goods as Japan at a far lower cost. Growth slowed, and over the last 2 decades, successive Japanese governments have tried to revive the economy. But many experts have criticized these efforts for not being aggressive enough. Today, Japan's population is aging. As a result, its once high levels of household savings are falling. The weak inflation rate is making it hard for the government to stimulate domestic demand and service its already high debt levels. Prime Minister Shinzo Abe and Japan's central bank have put in place some of the most aggressive measures in a generation to kickstart the economy. But these may yet prove to be too little, too late. Azhar Sukri, TRT World.
Well, for more on this, here is Meiyu Yoshida, who's in Tokyo for us.
Well, the Japanese economy has been sluggish despite an all-out effort by the government and the central bank. So Prime Minister Shinzo Abe decided to put together a massive stimulus package to prop up the economy, and the amount is much bigger than initial estimates. Mr. Abe unveiled an economic stimulus package of 28 trillion yen, that's more than $265 billion, which is nearly 6% the size of Japan's economy. And of the total, 13 trillion yen will be fiscal spending, likely spending by national and local governments. Now, in a speech in southern Japan on Wednesday, Mr. Abe said he needs to take steps to support domestic demand and put the Japanese economy on a firmer recovery path. And in order to do that, Abe said he'll use various measures, adding that the government will compile the package next week. But no details provided on new spending or how the money will be used. Some analysts are having doubts how long the impact will last, as monetary stimulus seems to be running out of potential, and the markets are used to this size of stimulus.
Well, let's get some analysis now. Seijiro Takeshita joins us from Shikuoza in Japan. He is professor at the School of Management and Information there. Seijiro, thank you very much for joining us again on Money Talks. We heard in our report there not a lot of detail about where this money is going to. Where would you think it's going to be channeled?
Well, I think he's going to focus clearly on a lot of his second set of 3 arrows, which basically focuses very much on structural, transitional type of changes. For example, like childcare, Medicare. One of the biggest problems we have, as you just reported, are demographics. Also, future growth areas, for example, believe it or not, farming, and also tourism, and a lot of infrastructures that would basically create the foundation of these areas. So I can see that he's probably going for a much more longer solution, because I think he's starting to understand that the real problem in Japan cannot be solved in short to mid-term stint, which many of his predecessors have been doing.
Well, we heard in Azhar's report that there was a problem with Japan's management structure over the last couple of decades and also demographics. Throwing money at the problem won't cure those two ills, will it?
No, actually, the biggest problem, in my opinion, is that Japan is still, in its managerial format, structured for growth. Well, it shouldn't be aiming for growth because we're already a mature economy, as you reported. We should be focusing a lot more from process innovation into things like product innovation as well. But we're not really suited for that. And also, well, I would say the cultural factors and also structural factors are not really suited for that kind of change at this moment for Japan. So these has to be addressed as well. There needs to be, of course, top-down change, but it's very difficult here because, well, we don't want to erode our strength as well. Now, this is where the danger sign is because there's a lot of move into moving toward American type of governance, which we will not be able to comply with.
Seijiro Takeshita, thank you very much for joining us on Money Talks. Appreciate your analysis.